The night was still, the kind of hush that London rarely granted, as though the city itself were waiting for something to break the silence. And break it did. At precisely 1 in the morning, the quiet was shattered by a cry that rang out across Pemberton Square. It was sharp, desperate, and ended far too quickly. By the time the constables arrived, summoned by a terrified maid who had fled into the street, the door to number 14 stood ajar, its brass knocker glinting faintly under the gaslight. Inside, the grand house of Sir Lionel Fenton was not as it should have been. Sir Lionel, a retired colonial administrator known for both his temper and his tidy habits, lay slumped over his desk in the library. A decanter of brandy stood untouched beside him, one hand flung out as if he had tried to reach for something in his final moments. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, the glass lenses of his spectacles cracked across the bridge. Death had claimed him swiftly, though whether by natural means or something darker, the police could not yet decide. But what held them, what confounded them utterly, was the scrap of paper clenched tight in his fist. It was no will, no letter, no plea for help. Instead, it was a page torn from a child's exercise book, scrawled with numbers and symbols that made no sense. Some looked like parts of a multiplication table, others like snippets of Greek letters, and between them random doodles. A triangle here, a spiral there. To the unimaginative eyes of the constable in charge, it seemed the meaningless work of a lunatic. But the way Sir Lionel had gripped it, with the paper crumpled and sweat-soaked, made it impossible to dismiss as chance. The windows of the library were all locked from within. The only door, the one leading to the hall, had shown no sign of forced entry. The maid swore she had heard her master shouting at someone not an hour before the scream. Yet no one else was found in the house. The cook and the footman had been sent away on errands earlier in the day. The butler, Evans, claimed he had retired to his room by 10 and heard nothing until the maid's shrieks rang through the house. Nothing was stolen, the study remained neat, and no weapon presented itself. Inspector Moffat, a stout man with thinning hair and a tendency to sweat even in the cool of midnight, rubbed his forehead as he stared at the paper once more. "I'll be dashed if I can make head or tail of it," he muttered. "Some fool's game or puzzle, maybe. But why would a dying man clutch it like his life depended on it?" It was then that the name on every policeman's lips was suggested, Lord Peter Wimsey. When the ordinary mind failed, when logic tangled itself into knots, there was always the nobleman with his drawling wit and unnervingly sharp eye. And so, by dawn, a message was sent. By 9 o'clock. Lord Peter stood in the Fenton library, his monocle gleaming faintly as he surveyed the scene. He was dressed immaculately, as though he were bound for a luncheon rather than a house of death, but his eyes missed nothing. "So," he said lightly, "we have a corpse, a locked room, and a code. My dear Moffat, one almost feels obliged to applaud the arrangement. It smacks of those penny dreadfuls one reads on a rainy day." The inspector scowled. "It's no amusement, my lord. The man's dead, and I've a house full of servants quaking in their boots." Lord Peter bent over the desk, his long fingers brushing against the splintered rim of the broken spectacles. "Strange, isn't it? A man who prided himself on orderliness, dead amid such chaos of meaning. Tell me, was Sir Lionel a man of puzzles?" "Not to my knowledge," said Evans the butler stiffly. "Sir Lionel preferred his ledgers and accounts. He was a practical gentleman." "Then why the symbols?" Lord Peter unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing its crumpled edges. His head tilted as his gaze danced across the peculiar assortment 17x fort, then abruptly cut off. A Greek delta drawn clumsily, beside what might have been a tally of 5 slashes. Below that, a crude spiral. A schoolboy's work, indeed. Or perhaps, someone's attempt to disguise the important as the trivial. He moved about the room then, peering at the locked windows, the heavy curtains, the half-burnt lamp on the desk. There was no smell of poison in the air, no trace of powder or smoke. The brandy in the decanter glowed amber, but remained sealed. Nothing outwardly sinister clung to the chamber, and yet the silence felt too calculated. The arrangement too neat, like the setting of a stage after the actor had left it. Lord Peter's gaze settled on the bookshelf. A single volume jutted slightly forward, Julius Caesar, the school edition. He drew it out. Inside, between pages 88 and 89, a folded scrap of similar paper lay hidden. He unfolded it to reveal more numbers. Yet these were arranged in rows, resembling a ledger column. The digits were underlined here and there, and between them odd little marks that could have been the beginnings of letters. Inspector Moffat leaned over. "Another piece of the same nonsense?" Or, Lord Peter murmured, "a key to the nonsense. The trouble with codes, my dear Inspector, is that they rarely appear sensible until you find the trick of them. And when you do, they can be devastatingly simple." He returned the book carefully, then walked to the corpse. Sir Lionel's hand still twitched stiffly, the rigor mortis creeping in. Lord Peter studied the fingers, the nails, the faint ink smudge at the base of his thumb. He wrote something, not long before death. And not with his usual pen, I'll wager. Do we have his pens? The maid hurried to fetch a tray, 2 fountain pens, one neatly capped, the other missing. Lord Peter smiled faintly. Missing pens. Locked windows. Servants who swear they heard a quarrel but saw no one. It grows curiouser and curiouser. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing. What if the room was not locked to keep someone out, but to keep something hidden within? And what if this so-called nonsense code is less about numbers and more about names? Moffat groaned. "You'll have me chasing shadows." "Whimsy." "On the contrary, Inspector," said Lord Peter softly. "Shadows are what reveal the light." Sir Lionel Fenton did not die clutching random scribbles. He died trying to leave behind the truth. And if I am not very much mistaken, this broken code will prove the key to his murder. And with that, the game had begun. The house, the servants, the scraps of paper, all became pieces of a puzzle whose solution lay tantalizingly out of reach, yet waiting, just waiting, for the right mind to unpick it. Lord Peter remained by the desk, turning the scrap of paper between his fingers, as though it might suddenly betray its secrets under scrutiny. The constables busied themselves with routine, dusting the door handles with powder, cataloguing the objects on the shelves, noting the time by the stopped mantel clock. They moved about in the stolid, plodding manner of men who had seen many deaths but solved few mysteries. Yet Whimsy's eyes were restless, darting here, alighting there. "Routine is a fine thing, Moffat," he murmured. "But it has the unfortunate habit of missing the peculiar. One must look not at what is present, but at what is oddly absent." "Absent?" the inspector asked, frowning. "Precisely. Observe. My dear man, Sir Lionel sits at his desk, a glass of brandy within easy reach. Yet he has not drunk from it. Strange enough for one who habitually poured himself a nightcap. Stranger still that he wears his spectacles, though cracked, when his drawer here contains a spare pair in excellent condition. Why not change them, unless they were broken in his last moments? But then, how? There is no sign of a blow." The inspector shifted uneasily. He might have dropped them. Indeed. Or someone might have snatched them away, or forced him down so roughly that the bridge snapped against his own nose. Little things, Inspector, are the true heralds of violence. While the policeman shuffled in awkward silence, Lord Peter bent low over the carpet beneath the chair. He plucked up something small, a half-smudged rubber eraser, the sort one finds in a schoolboy's desk. He turned it over delicately between thumb and forefinger. "Tell me, Evans," he called to the butler, "was your master in the habit of using rubbers in his correspondence?" The butler's eyebrows twitched. "No, my lord." Sir Lionel wrote with precision. He had no need to erase. "Then," said Wimsey lightly, "we must ask ourselves who in this house makes use of such things." His gaze drifted toward the maid hovering nervously by the door. The girl blushed and twisted her apron. "I use pencils sometimes, my lord, for the shopping lists," she stammered. "Of course you do," said Wimsey kindly, slipping the eraser into his pocket. "But not here in the library. In the middle of the night." The inspector made a note, his expression grim. Already the faint scent of deception curled through the air. Wimsey wandered to the bookshelves again, running his fingers along the spines. Books tell one a good deal about their owner. But sometimes they tell even more about those who meddle with them. He stopped suddenly, drawing out a slim volume bound in faded red. The title was in Greek Plutarch's Lives. The pages crackled as he opened them, and from between the leaves slid a folded scrap. This time blank, save for a faint indentation as though something had been written and rubbed away. "Curious, is it not?" Wimsey said softly. "An eraser found by the desk, a paper rubbed blank hidden in a book, and a dead man clutching symbols like a drowning man a rope. What is it, Inspector? But the shadow of a message destroyed." The room seemed to grow heavier with the weight of it. Inspector Moffat wiped his brow. But who would destroy such a thing, and why? "That, my dear fellow, is the play we are about to watch unfold." Wimsey's eyes flicked once more to the servants. The maid avoided his gaze. The cook wrung her hands in the hallway. The butler's composure was perhaps too perfect, his spine too rigid. Somewhere among them lay not merely fear, but guilt. He turned back to Evans. "Pray tell me, did your master receive any visitors yesterday?" The butler hesitated, only for the briefest fraction of a second, but Wimsey saw it. "None, my lord." "Only letters." "Letters, you say?" Wimsey's eyes sharpened. "Where are they now?" "In the desk, my lord." The inspector rifled through the drawers, producing 3 envelopes, a bill, a circular, and a note in a woman's hand inviting Sir Lionel to a committee luncheon. Nothing sinister on the surface. Wimsey mused, slipping the luncheon note into his pocket. It seems Sir Lionel's correspondents are as harmless as doves. And yet, what if there was a letter not meant to remain in the desk? What if the real message was destroyed? As he spoke, his fingers brushed along the edge of the desk blotter. He lifted it. Beneath, faint impressions lingered, lines of writing pressed through by a firm hand. Wimsey pulled a sheet of paper from his own pocketbook, laid it carefully atop the blotter, and rubbed with the side of a pencil. Gradually, words emerged like ghosts recalled from the grave. Inspector Moffat bent over. "What does it say?" Wimsey read aloud. "He knows. Tonight, library, code, that is all. Short, urgent, and decidedly ominous." The inspector swore softly. So Sir Lionel discovered something. He knew, and that knowledge killed him. "Precisely," Wimsey said. "And someone thought to erase the rest. Yet forgot the blotter keeps secrets of its own. Never trust paper, Inspector. It remembers everything." At that moment, a sound disturbed the hush, a clatter of china from the passage. The maid had dropped a tray. Her face was pale as chalk when Wimsey glanced her way. "Clumsy," she whispered, stooping to collect the pieces. But Wimsey's eyes lingered. "A mere accident." or the tremor of a guilty conscience at hearing words too close to truth. He smiled faintly, as though amused by nothing at all. "Do take care, my dear. Accidents are so inconvenient." He returned to the corpse once more, gazing down at the stiffened hand clutching the coded page. "We have a dead man, a vanished letter, a code broken or perhaps only half built, and a household full of nervous souls. What we lack is motive. Sir Lionel was many things, a tyrant to his staff, a bore at the club. But he was not a man one would kill for amusement. No, he must have stumbled upon something worth silencing." Inspector Moffat groaned. "You're spinning cobwebs, Whimsy. Give me a thief and a weapon, and I know where I am. But this is shadows and puzzles." "Shadows and puzzles are precisely what murderers weave," said Whimsy. He tapped the coded paper thoughtfully. "And the first false step has already betrayed itself. Someone in this house claimed Sir Lionel had no visitors yesterday, yet this paper, this childish scrawl, did not spring from his tidy hand. He was given it, or forced to write it under another's instruction." Moffat's eyes narrowed. "You mean one of the servants lied?" "I mean, Inspector, that one of the servants knows more than they admit. And I intend to discover which, before the day is done." The sun had risen higher now, sending pale shafts of light across the floorboards. The library seemed less haunted, yet more dangerous, for daylight often sharpens suspicion rather than dispels it. Whimsy pocketed the papers, straightened his coat, and turned with a faint smile. "Let us proceed then. I believe our play has moved from the first act into the second. And the actors, bless them, are already beginning to fumble their lines." Lord Peter seated himself languidly in Sir Lionel's armchair, as though he had merely dropped in for tea and gossip. Yet behind the easy posture, his eyes gleamed with that unnerving attentiveness which few could withstand. He motioned for the servants to be brought in one by one, and Inspector Moffat, with a grunt of disapproval at the aristocratic method, obliged. The butler, Evans, was first. He entered with the air of a man affronted by circumstance, his back straight, his chin held high, and his answers clipped with dignity. "I retired to my quarters at 10, my lord. I heard nothing until the maid screamed. Sir Lionel was particular about his privacy in the evenings. I did not intrude." "And yet you told us earlier you heard him speaking with someone before he died," Lord Peter said casually, polishing his monocle. A faint flicker of annoyance crossed the butler's features. "I said I heard the maid mention it, my lord. I myself heard no such quarrel." "Eh?" Whimsy twirled the monocle between his fingers. "Curious. For the maid was most emphatic that you were awake when she raised the alarm. She claimed she ran first to your door, and that you emerged in some agitation. If you had retired at 10, how was it you appeared fully dressed?" The butler's composure cracked, if only slightly. I keep myself prepared, my lord. One cannot answer a servant's cry in one's nightclothes." Lord Peter smiled faintly. "How very commendable of you, Evans. That will do for the moment." When the butler withdrew, Whimsy leaned back with a sigh. "Our butler has a fine gift for dignity, Inspector. But dignity does not explain contradictions." The maid was ushered in next, twisting her apron between trembling fingers. She was a slight, mousy girl, eyes wide with fear, and her voice came out in fits and starts. I was polishing the silver, my lord, when I heard Sir Lionel's voice. He sounded angry, like he does sometimes. He was saying, 'You'll not get away with it,' or something close. Then I heard another voice, deeper, but I couldn't make out the words. It frightened me, so I went to fetch Evans. And then the scream came." Whimsy leaned forward, his tone gentle. "You are quite sure you heard two voices?" "Yes, my lord." Quite sure. And yet Evans insists no such thing reached his ears. Curious, isn't it? Inspector. Inspector Moffat grunted, scribbling in his notebook. One of them's lying. Or both, Whimsy murmured. No? My dear, he added to the maid, tell me, when you entered the room after the scream, what did you notice first? She hesitated, her lips trembling. I noticed the paper in his hand, sir. It was all crumpled like he'd been holding it tight. And his spectacles, broken, they were. I thought maybe he'd fallen. Whimsy tilted his head. You did not notice the eraser by the desk? No, my lord, she whispered. Yet you do the shopping lists in pencil. Where do you usually keep your eraser? In the kitchen drawer, sir. Whimsy's gaze softened, though his eyes sharpened at the corners. Indeed. That will be all. My dear? The cook followed, a stout woman with ruddy cheeks and a habit of wringing her hands in her apron. She was voluble, too eager to supply detail. I'd been at market half the day, my lord. Evans sent me out for fresh fish. I returned about 7 and went straight to the kitchen. I heard nothing unusual, nothing at all, until the scream. I never set foot in the library. Oh, but Sir Lionel was a harsh master, quick with his tongue, slow with his praise. Many a time I said to myself, Cook, you'll be glad when he's gone to his rest. But murder, Lord save us. I never thought to see such a thing. Her words tumbled over themselves, a rush of denial before accusation had even touched her. Whimsy watched her with mild amusement. Tell me, good woman, did Sir Lionel keep a strict household account? That he did, sir. Every farthing written down. He checked my receipts himself, and I had to account for every penny. And yet yesterday, Whimsy said idly. He sent you to market twice, did he not? Once in the morning, once in the evening. Yes, my lord. Evans gave me the list. I thought it odd. For Sir Lionel had already what he needed, but Evans said the master wished it so. Whimsy smiled, dismissing her with a bow. Thank you. You have been most helpful. When the cook had gone, Whimsy tapped the armrest lightly. A houseful of contradictions, Inspector. Evans claims he retired, yet was fully dressed at the alarm. The maid insists she heard 2 voices, while Evans denies it, and the cook swears Evans sent her away on unnecessary errands. What a busy man our butler was yesterday. Moffat grunted. You think Evans did it? I think Evans knows more than he wishes to tell. But guilt is a coat many can wear, and some wear it better than others. Let us hear from the footman. The footman, a lanky fellow with a sullen air, shuffled in with reluctance. He avoided Whimsy's eyes, staring instead at the carpet. I was out, sir, most of the evening. Evans sent me with parcels. I came back after 11, didn't see Sir Lionel. Didn't hear nothing. Did Evans often send you out so late? Whimsy asked mildly. Sometimes, sir. Not often. He said Sir Lionel wished it. Aye. And you obeyed without question? The footman shrugged. Evans runs the house. What he says goes. Very loyal, Whimsy said softly. One more question. Did you notice anything missing from the library when you entered after the alarm? The footman hesitated too long before answering. No, sir, nothing. Whimsy's smile broadened. A very careful reply, my good man. Careful answers often conceal careless truths. That will be all. When the door closed behind him, Whimsy turned to the inspector. You see, Moffat, each tongue tells a different tale, and the seams do not align. The maid swears to voices, Evans denies them. The cook admits to being dispatched on pointless errands. The footman mutters half truths and shields his eyes. And through it all, the eraser by the desk, the blank sheet in the book, the coded note in Sir Lionel's hand, traces of a message someone desperately wished to erase. Moffat scowled. Which one of them is lying? Whimsy's gaze lingered on the door through which Evans had departed. Perhaps all of them, in small ways. Lies often come in fragments, Inspector. Stitch them together, and you may see the whole cloth. But for now, one thing is clear. Sir Lionel Fenton died not by accident, but by design. And someone in this house is playing a dangerous game of deception. He leaned back, his voice soft but firm. The trick is to discover who profits from silence, and who trembles most when the truth is near. The library had grown close with the scent of lamp oil and stale smoke. But Lord Peter seemed entirely at ease, stretched in Sir Lionel's chair with his fingers laced together. Inspector Moffat paced like a bulldog straining at its leash, muttering over the contradictions. Whimsy let him sputter a while before speaking. "My dear Inspector, we stand at the edge of a maze. We can see the hedges, tall and forbidding, but we cannot yet discern the path within. Each of our little actors has supplied us a motive, though none quite fits the whole puzzle." Moffat grunted. "I hear plenty of half motives, Whimsy." The cook resented his penny pinching ways. The maid was frightened of his temper. Evans ran the household like a tyrant's adjutant, and maybe saw himself better rid of his master. The footman skulks about like a guilty schoolboy. But which of them would kill for it? "That," Whimsy said lightly, "is the charm of murder, Inspector. One needn't seek who would kill for cause, only who feared what Sir Lionel discovered." He rose and moved to the desk, sifting once more through the neat piles of account books. "Consider Evans, a butler who rules the household with a rod of iron. Yet suddenly his errands take both cook and footman from the house for long stretches on the very night his master dies. Convenient, is it not? Alone with Sir Lionel, Evans would have opportunity aplenty." "Eh?" Moffat growled. "But what's his motive?" "Ah, motive," Whimsy mused, tapping one of the ledgers. "Here lies the rub. Sir Lionel accounted for every farthing. Such men notice discrepancies, and such men ask questions. Suppose Evans had been dipping into the accounts, or arranging matters to his advantage. A single discovery in these pages might spell his ruin." Moffat's eyes lit. "Theft, then? Perhaps. But theft alone does not explain the coded papers. Why conceal? Why destroy? Why leave Sir Lionel clutching symbols? Unless the theft was but part of something larger." Whimsy replaced the ledger and turned to the maid's story. "Now consider our little maid. She hears two voices. Brave of her to admit it when Evans denied it. But why so pale, why so ready to tremble? Fear, Inspector. Not the fear of her master's temper. She had grown accustomed to that. Fear of being caught in a lie. Or fear of what she knows but dares not say. The timid often conceal knowledge more dangerous than a bold man's threats." Moffat frowned. "She's no killer. Soft as butter. Soft things can conceal sharp edges," Whimsy murmured. "And the cook, too eager," Whimsy said crisply. Her tale spilled out before she was asked. Mark you, she admitted she was sent on errands twice. She resented Sir Lionel's watchful accounts. What better chance for revenge than a moment when she is out, her absence ordered by Evans? She might return later than she claimed, enter unseen. And, he let the thought dangle. But again, no single thread explains the code. The footman, Moffat pressed. "I." The footman, Whimsy smiled. "A sulky fellow loyal only to Evans. He went out late with parcels. But tell me, Inspector, who sends parcels at 11 o'clock at night, and to whom? Until we trace his errand, we stand in fog." Moffat rubbed his temples. "So all four of them have reason. Greed for Evans, resentment for the cook, fear for the maid, blind loyalty, or perhaps orders, for the footman. But none ties neat." "Exactly," said Whimsy. "It is the maze. Motives scattered like breadcrumbs, yet the path remains elusive. And still we have Sir Lionel's final words, recorded in ghost writing he knows. Tonight, library, code, who was... What knowledge was dangerous enough to kill for? Until we answer that, we wander blind." He crossed once more to the broken spectacles, lifting them delicately. "Do you not find these remarkable, Inspector? A man so precise would never tolerate a crack in his lenses. They were broken in struggle, I warrant. Yet there are no signs of a brawl, no overturned chair, no blood. A silent struggle, then, between two men, or perhaps a man and a woman, where Sir Lionel was forced down, his spectacles snapped, his pen snatched to write some fragment. Then erased." Moffat grunted again. "You spin too many webs, Whimsy. Give me solid ground." Lord Peter smiled faintly. "The ground is solid enough, Inspector. We have only to dig a little." He summoned Evans again. The butler entered with the same measured dignity. Whimsy regarded him coolly. "Evans, who pays the servants' wages?" "Sir Lionel, my lord." He was prompt, always. "And yet," Whimsy said, tapping the ledger, "there is an odd discrepancy in last month's accounts." An entry struck through, another added in different ink. "How do you explain it?" Evans stiffened. I keep no accounts, my lord. Sir Lionel wrote them himself." "But you carried the receipts," Whimsy pressed. "Cook has already told us you handled her errands." The butler's jaw tightened. "I merely conveyed his wishes." Whimsy's smile widened. "So you say. And yet, Evans, your master suspected someone. He wrote a message he knows. One might suppose he referred to you." Evans flushed, but bowed stiffly. "I serve faithfully, my lord. I will answer no more insults." He withdrew before Moffat could stop him. Whimsy chuckled softly. "Observe, Inspector. A man too calm until pressed on accounts. A man who sends servants on needless errands." The scent grows stronger. But Moffat shook his head. And the maids' voices, the footman's parcels, the cook's resentment. How do those fit? "That," Whimsy said, his tone bright with anticipation, "is the charm of our little game. Each motive may twine into another. Perhaps Evans feared exposure. Perhaps the maid overheard a conversation not meant for her ears. Perhaps the footman delivered more than parcels. Perhaps the cook's errands were cover for some other design. What we know is this: all four are tangled in Sir Lionel's death. Which string leads to the heart? That is what we must follow." He turned once more to the coded paper, laying it flat upon the desk. His eyes traced the numbers, the Greek letters, the crude spiral. It is almost a child's game, and yet it reeks of desperation. Sir Lionel wrote, or was made to write, these symbols. They conceal something, and when we know what, the motives will no longer scatter like sparrows but fly in one direction. The inspector sighed. "So we wait on the code?" "No," Whimsy said firmly. "We wait on no one. Tonight I shall test their stories further. Contradictions, Inspector, are the true cracks in stone walls. Pressure them, and the whole house tumbles." The afternoon light had shifted, drawing long shadows across the floor. The library, so neat and quiet, seemed now like a stage set with four unseen actors behind the curtain, each with a role, each with a mask. Lord Peter, smiling faintly, stepped to the window and gazed out into the square. "The maze is narrowing, Inspector. Soon we shall see which turn leads us out, and which leads us into the murderer's lair." The day wore on, and the heavy silence of Pemberton Square thickened into the kind that makes men restless. Inspector Moffat had grown impatient with Lord Peter's quiet circling of clues. He wanted something firm, something that would close the case before it slipped into rumor and scandal. And soon enough, chance, or what seemed like chance, placed just such a morsel in his hands. It was the footman who blundered first, searching through his quarters. The constables turned up a folded scrap of paper hidden behind the lining of his trunk. It bore the same hand as the coded note clenched in Sir Lionel's fist. Numbers, shapes, Greek letters, but in a more complete sequence. Unlike the crumpled scrap, this sheet showed no sign of erasure. When confronted, the footman grew pale, his tongue clumsy. I never saw it before." "Sir," he muttered, "Evans must have put it there."
"I swear I know nothing about it."
Moffat slammed a fist against the table. "A likely story. The very paper that killed Sir Lionel found in your chest. You'll not wriggle free of this, lad." The household buzzed with the news. The cook gasped, crossing herself. The maid cried out in terror, whispering that she always thought the footman looked queer of an evening. Even Evans, so composed, allowed himself the faintest arch of an eyebrow, as though justice were neatly served. But Lord Peter was not so easily swayed. He examined the sheet with great care, lifting it to the light, smoothing the edges between his long fingers. "Curious," he murmured. "The folds are sharp, recently made, yet the ink is dry as dust. Written days ago, I'd wager. And the hiding place, too convenient. Our footman does not strike me as a man of puzzles, nor of foresight enough to tuck damning evidence in the most obvious of places." Moffat bristled. "Obvious? Behind the lining of his trunk. Precisely, Inspector. The very first place any constable with half a nose would look. Criminals hide things in clever spots, not in cupboards marked thieves inside. This smells of a plant." Yet Moffat was not to be turned from the scent of victory. He had the footman locked away, and by evening word spread that an arrest had been made. The men of the yard congratulated themselves. The newspapers sniffed a headline, and the servants whispered that the shadow had lifted. Still, Whimsy's brow did not uncrease. He dined little, pacing the library with the coded scraps in hand. "It fits too neatly," he muttered. A code in the dead man's fist, another in the servant's trunk, and both leading straight to a sulky lad with no wits about him. Too neat by half. That night he sat long at the desk, comparing the 2 pages. Where one bore erasures, smudges, the pressure of a heavy hand, the other was neat, deliberate, as though copied from a master text. And here was the rub. The same sequence of numbers repeated in both, yet with a small difference. In Sir Lionel's crumpled scrap, the final line ended with a spiral, crudely drawn. In the footman's sheet, the spiral was absent. "Ah," Whimsy whispered to himself, "the copy lacks the flaw, which means it came first." Someone wrote the fair version, then forced Sir Lionel to repeat it, perhaps stumbling, perhaps adding that desperate spiral in protest or confusion. If so, the planted sheet is the original, not the forgery, and our poor footman merely the scapegoat. The following morning he pressed Moffat again, but the inspector was deaf to subtlety. "We've got the villain Whimsy. His own trunk betrays him. A servant in the pay of thieves, no doubt, or plotting blackmail. What more do you want?" "I want," said Whimsy softly, "to know who gains by his guilt. For mark you, Inspector, the true murderer still walks free and smiles while you clap irons on an innocent lad." That smile was almost visible at breakfast. Evans poured the coffee with a steadiness too perfect, his face a mask of grave concern. The cook bustled about more freely than before, as though a weight had been lifted. Only the maid remained pale, her eyes darting as though she feared something yet to come. Whimsy watched them all, his own smile as careless as ever. Later, when he strolled through the square with his hands in his pockets, he turned the matter over and over. The footman's arrest had silenced the household, But silence is rarely natural. It felt imposed, calculated. Evans had shown no surprise when the incriminating sheet was found. Only that faint lift of the brow. Too composed. Too rehearsed. And then there was the spiral. That spiral haunted whimsy, crude and awkward against the neatness of the code. It was not part of the puzzle, he felt sure, but a symbol, a mark of defiance, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to alter the meaning. Why cling to it so tightly in death? Why press it into his blotter? Scrawl it again with his last strength. The spiral was the truth. The rest, a veil. That evening, Moffat announced he would prepare charges. "We'll bring it before the magistrate tomorrow," he declared, puffed with importance. "It will be a tidy business. London doesn't like a murder dangling loose." Whimsy lifted his glass. "By all means, Inspector. But if you'll indulge me, I should like another look at the footman's supposed treasure trove before you parade him in chains." And so, in the dim lamplight of the yard's evidence room, Whimsy unfolded the sheet once more. He studied it in silence. Then with a faint chuckle, pulled from his pocket the eraser he had pocketed in the library. Lightly, carefully, he passed it over one corner of the page. At once the faintest smudge appeared, a rubbed-out mark beneath the numbers. Letters once written, then erased and overwritten with symbols. "Planted indeed," Whimsy murmured. "Not only planted, but doctored. Our murderer took the fair copy, disguised it with symbols, and left the true words half buried beneath. Only a guilty man, too eager, would risk such clumsy work." The inspector was unimpressed. "Meaning," said Whimsy, slipping the sheet back into its envelope, "that your case is no case at all. You have netted the wrong fish, and the true shark swims still." But Moffat would not yield, not yet. And so the false victory stood, celebrated by those hungry for resolution, while the real criminal remained close, watching, waiting, preparing their next move in the shadows of Pemberton Square. Lord Peter returned to the house with a queer smile upon his lips, humming as though the matter amused him. Yet his eyes, sharp and clear, missed nothing. He knew the play was not over. On the contrary, it had only just begun. The morning after the footman's arrest dawned sullen, the fog hanging low over London as though the city itself disapproved of Inspector Moffat's triumphant haste. Lord Peter Whimsy, however, was in no such mood for complacency. He rose early, as was his habit when a case gnawed at him, and set out to visit the one place more often neglected in investigations than any drawing-room or locked trunk, the past. He began in Sir Lionel's library, where the late man's papers had been hastily bundled by the constables. Moffat had glanced through them, and dismissed them as the usual tangle of correspondence and accounts, but Whimsy knew better. Where men who die with codes clenched in their fists rarely live in ordinary paperwork. As he sifted through the stacks, he found hints of Lionel's earlier life. Letters from years abroad, an old clipping about a society scandal, and, at the very bottom, a yellowed memorandum bearing the spiral symbol. It was not identical to the crude spiral scrawled in Lionel's final moments, but close enough to quicken Whimsy's pulse. This spiral was inked neatly beside a report dated 15 years ago, concerning a failed expedition to Cyprus. Lionel had been one of 3 patrons of the enterprise. The others were a certain Gregory Staines, now deceased, and a man whose name had already pricked Whimsy's ears in the present investigation, Charles Evans. Whimsy leaned back in the chair, tapping the memorandum with one long finger. Evans, the discreet and loyal secretary, the man whose composure was too perfect. Here was his name, bound with Lionel's in an affair long forgotten by the household. He carried the paper to the window, reading more carefully. The expedition had aimed to recover fragments of an early Christian manuscript said to contain a ciphered testimony. The venture had collapsed amid quarrels and accusations of theft. Nothing had been proved, but suspicions lingered in the air like smoke. Spirals and manuscripts. Whimsy murmured. Or Dead Man's last scribble was no random doodle. It was the old mark of their dispute. The quarrel never died. It merely slept, armed with this. Whimsy sought out one of the older servants, a withered but sharp-eyed man who had once served Sir Lionel's father. At first the fellow grumbled that such ancient gossip was none of his business, but a little coaxing loosened his tongue. I remember. My lord, he said, leaning heavily on his cane. Sir Lionel came back from that expedition changed. He and Mr. Evans, always at odds after that. Polite, mind you, but frost under the smiles. And there were whispers, oh yes, of some missing papers, writings in a strange tongue. Sir Lionel locked himself away for weeks after, scratching at codes like a man possessed. Whimsy's eyes gleamed. And the missing papers? Did they ever resurface? The old man shook his head. If they did, they never left this house. Evans was a clever one. Never trusted him myself. Piece by piece, the pattern sharpened. The false victory of the footman's arrest was a smokescreen. The roots of this crime dug deep into old soil, tangled with greed, betrayal, and secrets thought long buried. The code was no mere cipher. It was a relic of the Cyprus manuscript, the ghost of a quarrel resurrected. Whimsy spent the afternoon chasing threads. At the British Museum he consulted dusty catalogues, finding a record of the manuscript fragments, one sold at auction, another donated under an anonymous hand, and one still missing. Curiously, the donor of the second fragment had been listed as CE, a coincidence too neat to ignore. By evening, when he returned to Pemberton Square, his mind was alive with speculation. The household was subdued, unsettled despite the supposed resolution. The cook whispered of nightmares, the maid flinched at shadows, and Evans moved among them like a figure carved from marble. Yet Whimsy saw it now. The past in every line of Evans's face, the cold discipline of a man who had waited years for his rival to fall. At dinner, Whimsy toyed with his food, studying Evans. Curious thing, memory, he remarked lightly. One forgets so much, and then a little mark on a page brings it all flooding back. Take Cyprus, for instance, 15 years ago, and yet still casting shadows today. For the first time, Evans faltered. His hand stilled over the wine decanter, a flicker of something. Alarm. Perhaps. Passing through his eyes. But in an instant he was composed again. I fear I don't know what you mean, my lord. The past is past. Indeed, said Whimsy, smiling, but corpses have a way of dragging it into the present, don't they? Later that night, in the quiet of his rooms, Whimsy laid out his notes. The footman's innocence was almost certain, Evans's involvement increasingly likely. But there were still others in the web. The cook's sudden prosperity, the maid's anxious silence, the missing fragment of the manuscript. The crime was no solitary act. It was the culmination of an old betrayal, its embers fanned into flame. The shadows of the past stretched long across Pemberton Square, and Whimsy knew the game had deepened. To solve the present, he must exhume the secrets of 15 years ago, and somewhere in that buried quarrel, among spirals and codes and missing pages, lay the key that would unmask the hand that struck Sir Lionel down. Lord Peter Whimsy, though he had unearthed the Cyprus connection, knew that proof was still beyond his grasp. Suspicion, however well-founded, was but a feather on the scales of justice. Evans, if guilty, had the discipline of a man who had waited years for his moment. To catch such a creature, Whimsy would need not brute inquiry, but subtlety, a turn of the screw so delicate it seemed almost play. That evening he announced, with his customary air of idle amusement, that he intended to hold a small gathering in Sir Lionel's library. The servants were summoned, and Inspector Moffat, though suspicious of Whimsy's motives, attended out of equal parts curiosity and pride. The household gathered uneasy, while Whimsy, sprawled in an armchair as though nothing were amiss, proposed a game. Since our late friend was so fond of puzzles, he drawled, I suggest we honor his memory by attempting one. I have here. He produced a sheet of paper upon which he had sketched the spiral mark, or little challenge. Each of you, if you please, may draw how you think this spiral ought to be completed. No wrong answers, mind you, pure diversion. The footman, pale and bewildered from his ordeal, hesitated before making a clumsy loop. The cook, grumbling, scrawled hers with heavy hand. The maid, timid, traced hers delicately, almost fearfully. Evans, of course, was last. Whimsy passed him the paper with a languid smile. Evans's hand did not waver as he drew. His spiral was precise, deliberate, and, most damningly, identical in form to the symbol on the old memorandum from Cyprus. Capital, cried Whimsy, clapping his hands together. One might almost think you had seen this mark before, Mr. Evans. A silence fell, sharp as glass. Evans glanced up, his expression smooth. One spiral much resembles another, my lord. A child might have drawn it so. True, said Whimsy cheerfully, but not with quite such fidelity. It is, I think, a matter of memory rather than imagination. You know this sign, as Sir Lionel did. And yet, curious, you claim ignorance when questioned. Evans bowed his head slightly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. And what, pray, does this prove? That I have a steady hand. Whimsy leaned forward, his tone suddenly sharper. It proves that the quarrel of Cyprus is not forgotten, and that you, sir, carry it still. Sir Lionel died with this mark clenched in his hand, and you, out of all present, reproduce it as though you had drawn it 100 times. A curious coincidence, don't you think? Inspector Moffat shifted uneasily, though he muttered something about parlour tricks. Yet Whimsy saw more than ink on paper. He saw the flicker in Evans's eyes, the involuntary tightening of his jaw. The secretary had kept his composure through accusations, questions, and silences. But this simple, playful test had pierced the armor. Not content with this single stroke, Whimsy pressed further. You know, Evans, there is a peculiarity about spirals. They can be read inward as well as outward. A thing may appear to be ending when, in truth, it has only begun again. Much like certain feuds, 15 years buried, yet coiling back into the present. The words were chosen not for the inspector or the servants, but for Evans himself. It was bait, laid with care, and Evans, ever so slightly, reacted. His hand, which rested on the arm of his chair, clenched into a fist. Whimsy noted it, storing the image away. The reaction was small, but in men like Evans, small cracks meant hidden pressure. Pressure that would, with the right touch, fracture into confession. To deepen the snare, Whimsy adopted another tactic. He requested each servant to recount, once more, where they had been at the hour of Sir Lionel's death. But this time he interrupted them with trivial questions. What tune had been playing on the wireless? What dish had been prepared for supper? What shoes they had polished that morning? Inconsistencies emerged not in their alibis, but in their emotions. The maid, flustered, became more earnest with each correction. The cook grew defensive, indignant that her routine be questioned. The footman, still shaken, stumbled through but betrayed no malice. Evans alone remained too smooth, too consistent, his answers rehearsed. It was the perfection that betrayed him. No one who lived in a house of death could be so untouched by tremor. No one, unless they had rehearsed every line of their play. At the gathering's close, Whimsy dismissed the servants with thanks, remarking casually that he had all he needed. Evans lingered, as though to test Whimsy's true intent. "You are clever, my lord," he said softly once they were alone. "But cleverness without proof is mere smoke." Whimsy smiled, his tone light but his eyes cold. "Smoke, yes. But smoke has a way of finding the fire beneath. And I assure you, Evans, I am very fond of fires." That night, Whimsy wrote in his notebook, "Evans betrayed by hand, by memory, by silence too perfect. Motive rooted in Cyprus. Must uncover missing manuscript fragment, likely still in house. Spiral is key. It was unconventional, yes. But the game of spirals had revealed more than hours of interrogation." Evans was not the loyal secretary he pretended to be. He was a man whose mask had begun to crack under the strain of an old vendetta reborn. The trap was closing. Whimsy could feel it. But he also knew that Evans, patient as a spider, would not yield without a final struggle. The next move had to be decisive, one that would force the hidden truth into the light. The house had grown tense after Whimsy's peculiar experiment with the spirals. The servants whispered nervously in corners. Inspector Moffat blustered with irritation, and Evans moved with the same quiet composure as ever, but now under an invisible weight. Whimsy, though outwardly jovial, felt the balance shift. For the first time, he sensed the shadow of his adversary moving against him rather than merely waiting in silence. The next morning, while the household stirred to a subdued breakfast, Whimsy excused himself and made for Sir Lionel's study. The spiral symbol, the ciphered notes, the fragments of the late scholar's last work, all pointed to one thing: the missing manuscript. If it existed, it was the only object that could tie Evans, or any suspect, to the murder. Without it, the case rested on inferences and clever guesses. He had searched before, but now he felt the moment was ripe for another attempt, this time with sharper instinct. The drawers yielded nothing new, the cabinets only letters from old correspondence. But in a locked compartment behind the bookshelf, discovered by a faint scratch on the floorboard where the shelf had been pulled too often, Whimsy found a slim portfolio. He opened it carefully. Inside lay pages of Sir Lionel's notes, brittle with age, covered in his cramped handwriting. And there, half a sheet, torn jaggedly down one side, was the spiral symbol, repeated again and again, annotated with references to Cyprus and the words betrayal within. He closed the portfolio with care, his pulse quickened. This was it, the line from the past into the present, the bridge between Sir Lionel's death and Evans's uneasy composure. He slipped the folio under his arm and prepared to bring it into the light of the inspector's scrutiny. But fate, or rather the cunning of his unseen opponent, moved swifter. For when he returned an hour later, having stepped out briefly to fetch Inspector Moffat, the portfolio was gone, not misplaced, gone. The locked study door bore no marks of entry. The servants, wide-eyed, swore they had not been near it. Yet the compartment yawned open, its treasure stolen from under their noses. Inspector Moffat cursed. "Confound it, Whimsy, this is your doing!" Parading about with evidence like a conjurer with his cards. "Now it's gone, and we've naught to prove a thing." Whimsy, though pale, kept his composure. "On the contrary, Inspector, its vanishing is more eloquent than its presence. Someone in this house knew that those papers would damn them, and in removing them, they've told us precisely that. Still, the loss was a bitter wound. Without the manuscript, his case was smoke once more." Evans, for his part, seemed unshaken, almost amused, when told of the disappearance. "What a pity," he murmured. "Sir Lionel was a man of many notes. Perhaps it was all rubbish after all." But whimsy did not miss the glint in his eyes, a triumph quickly suppressed. Suspicion now grew poisonous within the household. The maid whispered that she had seen the footman lingering near the study door. The cook swore she had heard Evans moving about in the night. The footman accused the maid of slipping away from her duties, and Moffat began muttering about collusion among them all. Trust dissolved like sugar in hot tea. Whimsy walked the halls in thought, his long fingers tapping against his cane. Whoever had stolen the manuscript had done so with precision, and with the confidence that its absence would paralyze the investigation. Yet such boldness also carried risk. Evidence destroyed might be evidence remade. Perhaps a trace remained, a fingerprint, a stray fiber, an inconsistency in alibis. That evening, he contrived another quiet test. At supper, he remarked lightly on the missing papers, saying he recalled one phrase from them: betrayal within. Then, with studied nonchalance, he added, "Curious, isn't it?" Almost as if Sir Lionel foresaw that one close to him would turn traitor. The reaction was immediate. The maid gasped, clutching her apron. The cook muttered a prayer under her breath. The footman shifted, guilt or fear clouding his face. And Evans, though he smiled thinly, paused a fraction too long before lifting his glass. Whimsy filed it away. Delay, he knew, was often the louder confession. Later that night, he returned alone to the study, determined to scour the place for the faintest trace of what had been taken. He found, at last, something small. Almost laughably trivial, a scrap of parchment caught beneath the bookshelf, torn when the portfolio had been pulled out in haste. On it was a fragment of the spiral, incomplete, and half a word, source pure. It was not proof, but it was enough to assure Whimsy that the manuscript had not been a figment of his fancy. More importantly, it meant the thief had worked clumsily in their haste. The stakes, however, had risen dangerously. No longer was this a mere duel of intellects. Someone in the house had shown their hand, not only by silencing Sir Lionel, but now by erasing the very record of his discovery. That desperation meant Whimsy was close, perhaps too close. As he stood in the dim light of the study, the house silent around him, Whimsy felt a prickle of unease. The thief had struck once in secret. Would they dare strike again? This time at the meddlesome lord who refused to leave puzzles unsolved. The investigation was no longer a game of questions and answers. It was a game of survival played in shadows, where each step forward might bring not clarity but danger. And yet, for Whimsy, the danger only sharpened the chase. The truth was here, in this house, among these faces. It had been written once in ink and code. Now it was being rewritten in theft, silence, and fear. But Whimsy had no intention of letting it vanish forever. The house was quieter than usual that night, the tension from the stolen manuscript hanging like a heavy fog over every corridor. Whimsy moved cautiously, his steps measured, senses alert to the faintest anomaly. Even Evans, usually self-possessed, seemed restless, pacing the drawing room as if anticipating an invisible threat. Whimsy felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, sharpened now by the knowledge that his opponent was actively working against him, not merely hiding in the shadows. As he examined the study one last time before retiring, a sudden sound drew his attention, a sharp, deliberate click coming from the hallway outside. His hand went instinctively to the cane, though it was never merely a walking aid. He listened, hearing the soft shuffle of footsteps retreating down the corridor, fading into the distance. Someone was moving in the house, uninvited, precise in their timing. The following morning brought chaos. Lady Ashcombe screamed from the upper hall, her voice echoing through the household. Whimsy, Moffat, and Evans rushed to her side, finding her trembling before the door to Sir Lionel's private sitting room. The lock, new the previous evening, had been forced open, and inside, the room bore the telltale signs of violence: overturned chairs, broken glass, and most disturbingly, the body of the footman sprawled across the floor, a crimson stain seeping into the rug beneath him. Inspector Moffat was quick to act, barking orders and securing the house, but Wimsey's attention went immediately to the subtle details. The placement of the body suggested the victim had been caught off guard, but not entirely defenseless. There were no signs of a struggle beyond the immediate impact. It was as if the attacker had known precisely when and where to strike. Evans lingered near the doorway, his composure unshaken, but his eyes betrayed something, a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps calculation. Wimsey made a mental note. The stolen manuscript, the sudden murder. And now this. Someone was orchestrating events with unnerving foresight, testing the household's nerves, and perhaps even probing the detective himself. Questions rose like storm clouds. Who could have known the footman's schedule? Who would gain from his death? And most importantly, who had access to the hidden corridors and keys of the house that would allow such a precise strike without detection? Wimsey moved slowly around the room, examining details that might escape ordinary notice: a faint smear on the window sill, a partial footprint in the dust by the broken desk, and a small fragment of parchment caught beneath the corner of the carpet. The same strange spiral that had appeared in Sir Lionel's notes. It was clear the murderer had left it deliberately, perhaps as a taunt or a challenge. Wimsey's pulse quickened. His adversary was not only cunning but confident, wanting to draw him into a deeper game. He could almost hear the silent mockery in the arrangement, the carefully calculated risk meant to unsettle any pursuer. By midday, the household was in turmoil. The servants whispered in fearful clusters. Lady Ashcombe refused to leave her chambers, and Moffat insisted on guarding every exit. But Wimsey knew that walls and locks were irrelevant to the mind of a calculating criminal. The real danger lay in anticipation, the ability to think several steps ahead. Later, while inspecting the corridors, Wimsey noticed a subtle clue. He had overlooked a door leading to the servants' wing, slightly ajar, revealing a faint trail of footprints leading toward the garden. The prints were small, perhaps feminine, and carried traces of soil and something else. Something chemical, faint but distinctive. He crouched to examine them closer, recognizing immediately the remnants of a particular cleaning agent, one used exclusively by the cook. The revelation startled him, not because it pointed to the cook herself, but because it implied knowledge of her routines and the materials she alone handled. The murderer was intimate with the household, or someone who had observed it meticulously. Whoever it was, they were no longer content with theft. They were escalating, moving toward violence, and possibly aiming at the detective next. That evening, as Wimsey reviewed the day's developments in the drawing room, a subtle movement caught his eye. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room, barely perceptible, and a hush fell over the house. Before he could react, a sharp rap came at the window. A small, folded note had been thrust through the slightly open pane. Wimsey retrieved it carefully, unfolding the paper. In an elegant, almost taunting script, it read simply, "You are closer than you think, but close brings danger." Wimsey's mind raced. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone orchestrating events with precision, aware of his movements, and unafraid to communicate directly, confident that no immediate action could reach them. It was a provocation, a challenge that could not be ignored. The implications were chilling. The manuscript, the footman's murder, the stolen evidence, all had been part of a pattern. The next move would not be a minor misstep. It would be significant, possibly deadly. Whimsy realized he needed to anticipate not just what the criminal had done, but what they intended to do next. He summoned Evans privately under the pretense of reviewing the morning's findings. Watching him closely, Whimsy noted every inflection, every hesitation, every twitch that betrayed a reaction to the narrative of events. Evans maintained his polished exterior, but the faintest flicker of unease crossed his features when the footman's murder was discussed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to Whimsy, it was a confirmation Evans, or at least someone intimately linked to him, was entangled in the dark choreography of these crimes. As night fell, Whimsy sat by the study's fireplace, the shadows dancing across the walls, reflecting the labyrinth of motives, deceptions, and now open aggression. The second crime had shifted the game entirely. No longer was he merely solving a murder or recovering stolen evidence. He was now on a path that demanded foresight, intuition, and rapid deduction to prevent further bloodshed. He reviewed the fragments of clues, once more the spiral symbol, the torn manuscript, the precise timing of the footman's murder, and the ominous note. Each pointed to an adversary several moves ahead, but each also carried a trace, however slight, of human error. It was that trace that would guide him, as always, toward the ultimate truth. Somewhere in the house. The criminal watched and waited, confident in their mastery. But Whimsy knew that the game had changed. The next encounter would not merely reveal the murderer. It would decide whether the household, and perhaps the detective himself, would survive the shadows that had now fully descended upon them. The hunt had become immediate, urgent, and perilous. And for Whimsy, the thrill of the chase burned brighter than fear. He would uncover the next move, even if it meant stepping into the very trap the villain had laid. The fire in the study had burned low, casting long, unsteady shadows across the room, but Whimsy hardly noticed. His mind replayed the day's events in relentless succession, every detail dragging behind it the weight of unanswered questions. The murder of the footman had shifted the tone of the entire investigation. What had begun as a theft interlaced with deceit was now a case of calculated violence. The note thrust through the window, taunting in its elegant hand, had transformed suspicion into certainty. The criminal was not merely present, but actively directing the rhythm of the household's fear. Whimsy had sat long into the night, sifting through fragments of evidence. The spiral symbol, recurring like an obsession, the stolen manuscript, the curious footprints with traces of chemical residue, and Evans's flicker of unease. All of it tugged in different directions. Yet there was something he was missing, some thread so small that it escaped notice, but once pulled, would unravel the entire knot. Morning brought little peace. The household stirred under a pall of dread, each inhabitant moving with the nervous energy of someone expecting to be accused. Or worse, attacked. Inspector Moffat maintained his patrol of the halls with almost military diligence, but Whimsy knew the man's strategy was futile. Locks and guards could not confine a criminal who seemed to anticipate every precaution. At breakfast, Whimsy made a deliberate choice. Instead of interrogating, he allowed conversation to flow naturally, noting what each person said, and what they did not. Lady Ashcombe, pale but composed, spoke of her sleepless night, her eyes darting often toward the window as if expecting another note to appear. The cook complained about missing supplies, insisting that someone had taken cleaning agents from her cupboard. Evans, calm as ever, remarked casually that the footman had been unusually restless in recent days, as though troubled by something he dared not speak aloud. It was an offhand remark, delivered with apparent detachment, but it made Whimsy pause. Restless. The footman had not been singled out for suspicion before. Why, then, would Evans choose that particular word so deliberately in front of the inspector? Wimsey made a mental note. Sometimes guilt betrayed itself not in silence, but in the choice of words. The day passed with little new discovery until, in the late afternoon, Wimsey found himself once again in the sitting room where the footman had been murdered. He stood in the exact spot where the body had lain, closing his eyes, reconstructing the crime as if it played out before him. The details arranged themselves in his mind like pieces on a chessboard: the timing, the location, the lack of struggle, the deliberate symbol left behind. And then it struck him. A small but nagging inconsistency he had brushed aside before. The footprint by the desk. It had been small, lighter than that of a man, and traced with chemicals from the cook's cupboard. At first, Wimsey had considered the possibility of the cook herself, but the idea seemed implausible. Her duties tied her elsewhere at the time of the murder. But perhaps it had never been the cook at all. Perhaps someone had borrowed her supplies, knowing they would leave a trail that misdirected suspicion. Returning to the garden, where the footprints had first been found, Wimsey studied them again in the fading light. They were too carefully placed, as if intended to be discovered, not concealed. And yet, one print had been partially smudged, not by chance, but by someone adjusting their stance, waiting. Wimsey knelt and touched the earth, the soil faintly damp. Whoever had stood there had been watching the household long before the murder was committed. Back inside, he examined the torn fragment of parchment once more, holding it near the lamplight. The spiral symbol was too precise, too deliberate to be random doodling. It reminded him faintly of something he had seen before. An insignia, perhaps, or a personal mark used in correspondence. He ransacked his memory, reaching back to earlier cases and letters exchanged with academics, until the realization came like a cold shock. It was not just a spiral. It was a cipher mark, one that Sir Lionel himself had used in private notes years ago. The revelation opened a path he had not considered fully. The manuscript had been Sir Lionel's obsession, yes, but what if it was more than that? What if someone in the household had once been a recipient of those private notes, bound to him not merely by service or friendship, but by secrets tied to that same symbol? Wimsey's mind began to align the pieces, the pattern forming at last. The spiral appeared in the notes, on the parchment left by the murderer, and even in the placement of the crimes themselves. Each incident had circled closer to the heart of the household, from theft to murder to direct challenge. It was not random at all. It was a deliberate spiral inward, leading to a single target. The truth Sir Lionel had once hidden. He remembered Evans's remark again, that word, restless, too sharp, too pointed. The footman might indeed have known something that made him dangerous to the criminal's plan. And Evans, always calm, always precise, had drawn attention to it, perhaps without realizing that in doing so he had revealed his awareness of the footman's unease before anyone else had mentioned it. That evening, Wimsey staged his next move with care. He gathered the household in the drawing room under the pretext of reviewing evidence with Inspector Moffat. The air was heavy with suspicion, each face betraying fatigue and fear. Wimsey spoke slowly, deliberately, recounting the sequence of crimes, his voice even but carrying a subtle edge. He described the theft, the false clues, the murder, the taunting note. And then he paused, watching them closely. "It is a curious thing," he remarked softly, "how a pattern may emerge from what at first appears chaos. A misplaced word, a footprint that should not exist, a symbol that recurs without explanation. Put together, they do not confuse, they reveal." The silence in the room deepened. Lady Ashcombe's hands trembled on the arm of her chair. The cook muttered a prayer under her breath. Evans alone remained still, his expression unreadable, though his eyes met Whimsy's with a flicker of something. Defiance, perhaps, or anticipation. Whimsy let the silence stretch before continuing. The murderer has been most ingenious, creating diversions and shadows to mislead us. But even the cleverest criminal cannot erase their habits entirely. In fact, they often betray themselves in the smallest of ways. An unusual phrase, a mark on paper, a detail they know but should not. He leaned back, allowing the words to settle like dust in the lamplight. The pattern was not yet fully spoken aloud, but it was there, unmissable, and he could see in Evans's steady gaze that the man knew it too. Later, when the others had dispersed, Whimsy remained by the fire once more, the weight of the revelation pressing on him. The key had been there all along, in plain sight, waiting for him to see. The spiral was not just a symbol but a path, winding steadily toward its inevitable center. And now that he had glimpsed the shape of it, the challenge was no longer to uncover the truth, it was to survive long enough to prove it. The pattern had emerged, stark and undeniable, and in its clarity, Whimsy understood that the final moves of this game were fast approaching, each more dangerous than the last. The real contest was about to begin. Whimsy did not sleep that night. The fire in his study had burned down to glowing embers, and the shadows it cast seemed almost conspiratorial, curling along the walls as if sharing some secret. He traced the spiral in his mind again and again, turning the symbol over like a key in his hands. Each new observation pointed inexorably to Evans, yet he knew that accusing the man too soon would be reckless. To truly understand, he needed the motive, the driving force behind a series of acts so precise, so coldly executed. Morning brought little relief, for the household was still tense, every glance laden with suspicion. Lady Ashcombe moved with the fragile grace of someone balancing on the edge of panic, and the cook's muttered prayers grew more insistent with each passing hour. Whimsy, however, kept a quiet vigilance, observing without revealing the full weight of his deductions. He needed to draw out the truth, coax it into the open without forcing it. For the criminal was clever and observant, and any misstep could prove fatal. He returned to the study where the first murder had occurred, walking slowly, measuring distances, retracing steps. The spiral symbol seemed to pulse with significance under the lamplight, its meaning now clearer. It was not merely a mark, but a signature, a psychological fingerprint. Whimsy realized that the criminal's mind operated like the spiral itself, moving outward in chaos, yet always circling inward toward some hidden core. Evans arrived just after midday, ostensibly to report his observations. But Whimsy sensed a tension in the man's posture that betrayed unease. He welcomed Evans cordially, inviting him to sit, and began a careful, subtle questioning. He spoke of the thefts, the tampered evidence, and the murders, never pressing directly, but allowing details to hang in the air like suspended weights. "You see, Evans," he said lightly, "one can learn an extraordinary amount about a person by observing what they reveal unintentionally. A word, a gesture, a hesitation, these are often more telling than any confession." Evans remained composed, yet there was a flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression of recognition, as if Whimsy had touched something he did not wish to acknowledge. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it confirmed what Whimsy had suspected. The man knew he had been observed, and he understood the detective's scrutiny. Whimsy allowed a long silence to settle, letting the unspoken tension grow. Then, casually, he mentioned the footman's restlessness, repeating Evans's own words from days before. Evans's lips tightened, and his gaze flickered toward the floor. The reaction was subtle, but deliberate, a crack in the armor of his carefully maintained calm. "Curious," Whimsy said softly, "how even the most disciplined among us cannot resist leaving a trace of our anxieties. Restlessness, secrecy, the desire to protect. These things betray us in ways we do not anticipate." He rose and walked slowly around the room, glancing at the bookshelves, the furniture, and the objects arranged with meticulous care. It's often not the grand gestures, the obvious thefts or violent acts, that reveal a person's character, he continued, but the minutiae, the small compulsions that shape their choices. Evans shifted in his chair, uneasy now, the mask of placidity beginning to show the slightest cracks. Whimsy's words were carefully measured, revealing more than just observation. They suggested insight into the man's mind, a knowledge that could not have come from mere guesswork. It was then that Whimsy's eyes fell on a small, almost imperceptible mark on the edge of the writing desk. The very desk where the footman had been murdered. A faint indentation, as if something had been pressed and removed in a hurry. He leaned closer, noting that it matched the spiral pattern in miniature, hidden in plain sight. He realized instantly that the mark was a psychological lure placed to unsettle anyone investigating too closely, to test whether they would notice. And now the motive became horrifyingly clear. It was not greed, not vengeance, not the pursuit of influence. It was obsession. Obsession with control, with intellectual dominance, with shaping the lives of others as one shapes the pages of a manuscript. Evans had orchestrated each act, each clue, each death not for profit, but for the satisfaction of proving his superiority. Every movement was a demonstration. Every misdirection a message. He was always several steps ahead. Whimsy felt the chill of understanding settle over him. The criminal's mind was a labyrinth. Each corner carefully constructed to mislead, each step designed to assert dominance over those too unwary to perceive it. And the spiral, the recurring mark, was both a signature and a taunt, a symbol of his control, a constant reminder of the pattern he had imposed upon the world. The insight brought a grim clarity. The murders were not merely incidental, they were necessary components of a larger design. The footman, the manuscript, the taunting notes, they were all pawns in a game of intellect, a display of psychological superiority. Evans had acted not out of desperation, but out of the compulsion to demonstrate mastery, to orchestrate events with precision and elegance, to force others to recognize his genius through fear and manipulation. Whimsy now understood the stakes fully. The villain's obsession would drive him to extremes, and any attempt to predict his next move required a mind attuned not merely to logic, but to the compulsions of an obsessive intellect. He could no longer treat the case as a series of crimes. It was a living puzzle, one that demanded both patience and cunning. As evening fell, Whimsy prepared his plan with meticulous care. He knew that Evans would continue his pattern, that the spiral would guide the criminal's next actions. The detective resolved to anticipate those moves, to turn the villain's obsession against him, exploiting the very predictability of his compulsions. The household was tense, unaware that the motive, the hidden engine behind the horrors, had been laid bare. Whimsy moved among them with calm efficiency, observing, listening, and plotting. Each gesture, each word, each subtle reaction was now a piece of the final design he intended to complete. The hidden motive, dark and consuming, was no longer a mystery. It had been exposed, revealing a mind driven not by the ordinary passions of man, but by an almost pathological need to dominate, to prove, to control. Whimsy felt the weight of that knowledge pressing on him. knowledge that brought both clarity and danger. Evans's obsession was now a known quantity. But the question remained, could he be stopped before it claimed another life? And in the quiet of the night, as the last lamp flickered, Wimsey felt the first stirrings of the decisive strategy, the confrontation that would test intellect against obsession, logic against compulsion. The pattern was understood, the motive revealed, and the final moves of the deadly game were beginning to take shape. The truth was no longer hidden, but the path to justice would demand every ounce of insight and daring the detective possessed. The shadow of Evans's genius loomed over the household. Intricate and unyielding, but Wimsey had glimpsed its core. Now he would have to navigate it, to turn the hidden motive itself into the means of capture, lest the obsession spiral further, consuming anyone in its path. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and the final reckoning, the test of wit, will, and courage, awaited. Wimsey spent the night reviewing every detail of the case, tracing each movement of Evans with a precision bordering on obsession. The spiral pattern, the subtle psychological cues, the vanishing evidence, they all converged into a single, coherent path. By dawn, he had devised a plan that left no room for error, a strategy to confront Evans at the exact moment when his compulsions would betray him. The morning was grey and still, the household hushed as if sensing the tension that hung thick in the air. Wimsey moved among the servants with casual familiarity, masking the storm of calculation that raged within him. Each glance, each whispered remark, was carefully measured, a subtle signal to those who might be unwitting witnesses to the final act. The detective knew that Evans thrived on control. But even the most disciplined obsession has its breaking point when the world does not bend as expected. By mid-afternoon, Wimsey had assembled the scene exactly as he intended. The study, where so much had unfolded, was arranged to encourage a particular sequence of reactions. The spiral, now replicated in faint etchings on paper strategically placed, acted as both bait and psychological mirror. Every object, every shadow, was positioned to provoke the compulsions he had observed in Evans over days of careful scrutiny. Evans arrived punctually, as expected, his composure flawless, though a flicker of recognition passed across his features as he entered the study. He immediately noted the familiar spiral, its recurrence unsettling in its precision. Wimsey greeted him calmly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've been very busy," Wimsey said, letting his voice carry the lightest edge of amusement. "Or perhaps the patterns themselves have guided you here." Evans's hand tightened around the edge of a chair, almost imperceptibly, and Wimsey recognized it instantly, a telltale sign of the compulsive need to assert control. He allowed a moment of silence to stretch, letting the tension accumulate like static in the air. "I trust you have found all that you seek," Evans replied smoothly. Yet there was a subtle tremor in his tone, betraying an awareness of the trap he had walked into unknowingly. "I have," Wimsey said softly. "But you see, I have learned that patterns are like rivers. They reveal their source eventually, no matter how well you attempt to obscure them. The spiral is not merely a symbol of design, it is a reflection of the mind that created it." Evans's eyes narrowed, scanning the study. Noting the deliberate placement of objects, the faint markings that echoed his signature, he recognized that he was being drawn into a situation where the rules were dictated not by him, but by someone who had anticipated every step. "You think you can understand me?" Evans said, his voice low, edged with something almost like admiration. "But genius cannot be predicted." Wimsey inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps not. But compulsions can be. And even genius has weaknesses. At that precise moment, Whimsy allowed a loose stack of papers to fall near Evans's feet, the spiral pattern facing upward. The motion was subtle, almost casual, but it was enough to trigger a reaction. Evans bent instinctively, aligning the papers with the faintest attention to symmetry, his eyes flickering with anxiety and obsession. Whimsy watched intently, noting the precise moment when control slipped, when the carefully maintained facade began to fracture. "You cannot resist it," Whimsy said, stepping closer. "The pattern demands attention. You left traces, subtle cues, moments of overreach, all of which lead here. And now you are caught? Not by force, but by your own compulsions." Evans straightened abruptly, his breathing quickened, and for the first time, Whimsy saw the man's intellect wrestle with fear. The thought of being outmaneuvered, of the intricate designs he had imposed being deciphered, caused an almost imperceptible twitch in his posture. "You don't understand," Evans stammered, the mask of confidence slipping entirely. "It was necessary. Everything I did was essential. For order, for clarity." Whimsy's gaze was steady, unyielding. Order imposed through fear and murder is no order at all. And clarity achieved through destruction is but chaos masquerading as design. The pattern is clear now, Evans, and it leads straight to you. Evans's hands clenched, and he took a step back, the room now feeling confining, each shadow and object a silent accuser. His mind raced, desperately seeking an escape, but Whimsy had anticipated every impulse. There was nowhere to flee, no opportunity to regain the upper hand. "You see," Whimsy continued, his tone calm, almost gentle, "the very obsession that drove your actions is the same thread that reveals you. Every step, every subtle deviation, every psychological trace, it all converges. You cannot hide from it, because it is yours inescapably." A moment of silence followed, tense and suffocating. Then Evans laughed, low, bitter, and hollow. "You think you have won," he spat. "This is not over. There are always more patterns to follow. You cannot understand the complexity, the necessity." Whimsy did not flinch. He remained composed, his presence a steady counterbalance to the storm of Evans's desperation. "I understand more than you think. Enough to ensure that no more lives will be claimed, and that the pattern ends here." Evans's eyes darted toward the window, the study door, anywhere that might offer a final escape, but Whimsy anticipated it all. Two constables, silently stationed just beyond the threshold, stepped forward, cutting off any attempt to flee. Panic overtook Evans's face, and for the first time, his intelligence was overshadowed by raw, untempered fear. "Well, you will pay for this," he hissed, his voice shaking. "You cannot contain what you cannot see." Whimsy's expression softened, almost mournful. "But I can see the pattern of your choices, Evans, and it has led you to this moment. Justice does not require strength, only understanding. And that is something you left me, through your own compulsions, your own need to dominate." Evans's resistance faltered entirely, the carefully constructed persona collapsing as the constables moved to secure him. Whimsy watched unflinching, as the man's gaze flickered once more toward the spiral markings, and then downward in silent acknowledgement of defeat. As he was led away, Evans whispered, almost to himself, "It's never over." Whimsy remained standing in the study, the weight of the case finally settling around him. The spiral, the pattern, the hidden motives, all were now fully revealed, and the immediate danger ended. Yet, even in triumph, the detective felt the lingering chill of having glimpsed a mind so consumed by obsession, a reminder that human genius, untethered, can be as perilous as it is brilliant. The household exhaled collectively, tension giving way to relief. though few understood the subtle intricacies that had led to the capture. Whimsy allowed himself a brief moment to reflect on the delicate interplay of psychology, observation, and deduction that had brought the final confrontation to a successful conclusion. The pieces of the puzzle had all fallen into place, but the echo of Evans's compulsion, the spiral forever etched in memory, remained, a testament to the extraordinary mind that had orchestrated such chaos. In the quiet aftermath, Whimsy returned to the study, eyes lingering on the faint, carefully drawn spirals that now seemed almost peaceful. The pattern had emerged, the hidden motive revealed, and the final confrontation resolved. Justice, he knew, was not merely the cessation of crime, but the restoration of balance. A balance painstakingly restored through intellect, patience, and the unerring observation of human nature. Even as Evans was taken away, the quiet in the study felt incomplete, as if the air itself carried an unspoken tension. Whimsy lingered, surveying the room with a practiced calm, where yet a niggling unease tugged at the edges of his consciousness. Something was unsettled, a subtle irregularity that had evaded his attention until now. The spiral patterns, meticulously traced and observed, seemed almost too neat, almost too satisfying. A sudden intuition prickled at him, the sense that the resolution might be less absolute than it appeared. He crouched near the papers, where Evans had last been ensnared by his compulsions, noting the arrangement once more. There, at the margins of the carefully drawn spirals, faint notations had gone unnoticed in the rush to apprehend him. Tiny, almost imperceptible marks in an erratic hand, not Evans's elegant, obsessive lines, but something else entirely. Whimsy's brow furrowed. The irregularity suggested an afterthought, a subtle intervention. He realized with a quiet jolt that someone else had been at work, shadowing the patterns, shaping the evidence to guide him toward Evans. The constables outside awaited instructions, yet Whimsy waved them back, unwilling to leave the room just yet. He retrieved a magnifying glass and scrutinized the marginal notations. They were cryptic, almost like an anagram, a sequence that hinted at movement. A path not yet taken. Whoever had written them had intimate knowledge of both Evans's compulsions and the detective's methods. The realization struck Whimsy like a lightning bolt. Evans might have been a dangerous manipulator, but he was not the ultimate architect of this chaos. He retraced the timeline, reviewing every step of the investigation in his mind, from the first spirals that had drawn his attention to the vanished evidence, and the subsequent murder that had twisted the case into chaos. Each event had seemed to point naturally to Evans, yet now the margins whispered of another presence, a hidden hand steering both perpetrator and investigator toward a predetermined end. Whimsy's gaze fell on the window. Subtle scratches on the sill, slight dust displacement, and a faint smudge of ink, all overlooked before, suggested a clandestine entrance and exit. The perpetrator had been inside, observing, manipulating, and ensuring that Evans would be ensnared. Whoever this was had not merely participated in the crime. They had orchestrated the entire sequence, leaving Evans as a pawn, and even Whimsy as a piece to be nudged along the board. The detective leaned back, allowing the revelation to settle, every muscle tensing with the thrill of a new challenge. If Evans had been a master of obsession and pattern, this unknown figure was a maestro of misdirection. The final twist of the case had arrived silently, yet with devastating clarity. The case was far from closed. Whimsy left the study, moving with purposeful calm toward the library, where earlier inquiries had produced a collection of letters, ledgers, and correspondences that now demanded a second examination. Each document was reinterpreted through the lens of this newfound perspective, Patterns once attributed solely to Evans revealed subtle divergences, slight deviations in phrasing, unexpected timings in deliveries, and signatures that seemed faintly off. Someone had been writing, erasing, and adjusting, influencing both crime and investigation without leaving a trace obvious enough for casual observation. He paused over a ledger, noting a series of transactions that, at first glance, seemed mundane. Yet, when viewed through the new hypothesis, the dates aligned unnervingly with key moments in Evans's movements. The day the first spiral was discovered, the night of the vanishing evidence, and even the final confrontation. The realization crystallized. Evans had been maneuvered, nudged toward the behaviors that would expose him. Each step guided with uncanny precision. The detective's mind raced, recalling subtle interactions that had seemed incidental, a servant's cryptic remark, a neighbor's curious timing in delivering messages, the faint scent of tobacco lingering where none should have been. These details, dismissed in the flow of the initial investigation, now emerged as potential clues pointing toward the true mastermind. A person who had anticipated not only Evans's actions but Whimsy's responses. Someone who had engineered the chaos to reveal itself in exactly this pattern. Whimsy moved quickly, revisiting the scenes of the previous disturbances with a fresh eye. The vanished evidence, the second murder. Even the spirals themselves. They were no longer mere crimes of obsession, but elements of an elaborate stage, constructed to test his deductive powers while simultaneously hiding the true hand behind it all. Every fragment of chaos was calculated. Each apparent misstep a carefully designed provocation. A faint click from the adjoining room drew his attention. The library door, previously locked, was slightly ajar. Whimsy approached, sensing the presence of someone observing, perhaps confident that they had remained invisible. He stepped inside, scanning the shelves and floor, noting the dust patterns and subtle disturbances that betrayed a hidden presence. There, partially concealed behind the heavy curtains, a figure emerged. Tall, deliberate, and calm. The aura of control was unmistakable, far beyond Evans's compulsive intellect. "You've discovered the margins," the figure said softly, almost conversationally, as if remarking on an obvious truth. "I wondered how long it would take before you realized that Evans was merely a tool, a lens through which you could be tested." Whimsy's eyes narrowed, calculating, tracing every detail of posture, gesture, and tone. The final twist was undeniable. The real mastermind had been orchestrating the narrative from the shadows, guiding chaos with subtle precision, ensuring that the game would reach this precise climax. "And you thought yourself clever enough to manipulate him?" Whimsy asked, voice steady, though his mind worked furiously to uncover the full scope of the threat. "You underestimated the simplicity of human compulsion, and overestimated your own subtlety." The figure smiled faintly, an expression devoid of warmth. "Cleverness is a relative term, detective. What matters is that the pattern was completed, that the final confrontation occurred. Evans was exposed, and you confirmed your deductive prowess. But the case was never meant to end there. You see, there are always margins, always unseen forces shaping the story." Whimsy took a measured step forward, observing the calm certainty of someone used to operating in the shadows. The tension in the room was electric, every movement, every breath laden with the potential for sudden escalation. Yet Whimsy remained composed, aware that his strength lay in observation, patience, and understanding of human psychology, now tested to its absolute limit. "You've left traces," Whimsy said quietly, indicating the subtle irregularities in the papers and ledgers. "And they point here to you. Every deviation, every cryptic mark, every orchestrated accident has a signature. and signatures can be read, even when the author believes themselves invisible. The figure's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, an almost imperceptible crack in their veneer of control. Perhaps they conceded, but knowing is not the same as containing. You may deduce, detective, but can you anticipate the next move? A pause settled between them, a fragile moment where intellect and instinct collided. Whimsy's mind raced, assembling threads, testing hypotheses, and tracing invisible lines. The final confrontation with Evans had been resolved, but this was a test of comprehension, anticipation, and the ability to think several steps ahead, even when faced with a mind that had orchestrated an entire drama behind the scenes. And as the afternoon shadows stretched long across the study and library, Whimsy realized that the ultimate game had only just begun. The last-minute twist had arrived, and with it, the realization that genius could exist not only in the minds of criminals, but also in those who orchestrated the chaos, hidden in plain sight, challenging the very limits of deduction itself. The detective's hand hovered over the scattered papers, eyes narrowing, mind sharpening. Every clue, every irregularity, every shadowed movement became a weapon in the intellectual duel now unfolding. The true mastermind had stepped forward, and the final, most complex layer of the investigation had begun. The pursuit not merely of evidence or confession, but of understanding the mind that had orchestrated a series of crimes so elaborate that even the most brilliant detective could be tested anew. Whimsy inhaled slowly, letting the tension coalesce into focus. This was no longer about catching a single criminal or closing a case. This was a battle of wits, a confrontation of intellects, and the final twist had ensured that the story would demand everything he possessed, and perhaps even more than he thought he had. The game was far from over. Whimsy stood motionless, the figure before him still poised, almost serene, yet every muscle beneath the calm hinted at readiness for sudden action. The quiet in the library was oppressive, charged with the tension of minds circling each other, each calculating the next move. Then, as if compelled by an unseen rhythm, Whimsy began to speak, his voice measured and precise, tracing the hidden architecture of the case for the first time. "You orchestrated everything from the shadows," he said, his eyes never leaving the intruders. "Evans was a mere instrument, a catalyst to draw me into your design. Every deviation, every cryptic mark, every so-called accident was part of your grand experiment. But even in your meticulous planning, you left the faintest threads that, when woven together, reveal the truth." The figure tilted their head slightly, intrigued but guarded. "And what truth is that, detective? That I am clever? That I've danced you across the board as Evans danced beneath my hand? Perhaps. But cleverness, like a mask, only works until someone sees the face beneath." Whimsy's gaze fell to the scattered papers on the desk. "The margin notes you left, subtle, almost imperceptible, betray a hand far steadier than Evans's compulsive spirals. The dust on the windowsill, the misplaced ink, the faint tobacco residue, each a breadcrumb, seemingly insignificant, yet deliberately placed to guide the observant mind toward the reality you tried to obscure. Every pattern led to Evans to test me, but in doing so, you revealed yourself." The figure's composure wavered, just for an instant. A flicker of frustration, quickly masked, but it was enough. Whimsy advanced slowly, folding each observation into a coherent whole. "Even the timing of the letters and ledgers. They are not Evans's handwriting, not entirely. Subtle anomalies, almost indistinguishable, yet consistent across the sequence. Someone anticipated Evans's reactions, manipulated his compulsions to ensure the pattern unfolded precisely as intended. You wanted me to see a resolution, Yet here we are. The final twist was never Evans. It was you. For a heartbeat, the intruder considered retreat, then straightened, a faint smile curling across their lips. You are thorough, detective. Perhaps too thorough for my taste. Without warning, they lunged toward the window, slipping with the grace of someone long accustomed to evasion. Whimsy lunged instinctively, but the figure had already vanished, leaving behind only the faintest imprint of a footstep in the dust. The detective stood, surveying the room, his mind racing yet methodical. The evidence was sufficient to reveal the full scope of manipulation, the criminal mind that had remained hidden until now, but insufficient to secure an immediate arrest. The figure had escaped, leaving a haunting void that underscored the precariousness of justice. Yet even in their absence, the narrative of the case was clear, and Whimsy traced the invisible line connecting every event. He addressed the constables, who had arrived with measured haste. Evans was a danger, but only as a pawn. The true architect has left a signature, subtle and meticulous. Each clue overlooked, every dust mark, every irregularity in handwriting, every misaligned ledger entry, was a deliberate signpost. The game was intended to mislead, yet it has revealed the hand guiding it all. Our pursuit does not end here, the path is set, and we will follow it until the author of this chaos is brought to justice, or at least exposed. He stepped toward the window, scanning the street below, where shadows played across the cobblestones. The figure's absence did not lessen their presence, it was felt in every irregularity, every manipulated event, and every calculated risk. The detective's mind mapped possibilities, predicting likely routes and considering all the hidden refuges a mind so deliberate might seek. The hunt, though temporarily interrupted, had gained clarity. The villain was not gone entirely. They had only retreated into the calculated obscurity of their own making. Returning to the study, Whimsy reconstructed the sequence for himself, laying the events side by side with the overlooked anomalies. The first spiral, the disappearance of evidence. The second murder, Evans's capture. And the cryptic margin notes now formed a lattice of causation, each piece essential to the overall architecture of deception. The clarity was disconcerting. The villain's cunning had forced him to reconsider every assumption, yet it also demonstrated the predictability of human reaction, even when manipulated. Notice, Whimsy murmured, more to himself than anyone else, how each seemingly trivial detail was leveraged. The pattern was there all along. The pauses between letters, the slight hesitation in Evans's behavior, the irregularity of the spirals, all deliberate, all feeding into a larger construct. The constables watched him quietly, understanding the depth of analysis without needing every word spelled out. Whimsy moved to a ledger on the desk, flipping through the pages to illustrate the point further. Dates that had seemed mundane were revealed to be orchestrated in tandem with the psychological progression of Evans. Each moment calculated to provoke a predictable response. The brilliance lay not in Evans's obsession, but in the manipulator's capacity to predict and direct it. And yet, he continued, the human element remains imperfect. The smallest misstep, the margin notation that contradicted Evans's habitual patterns, the incongruities in handwriting, has exposed the orchestrator. Even a mind capable of shaping events so completely cannot eliminate the slightest imperfection. And it is these imperfections that allow justice, or at least understanding, to prevail. Despite the elegance of his explanation, a sense of unease lingered. The figure had escaped, leaving a void that could be filled only with speculation, anticipation, and careful surveillance. Whimsy knew that the ultimate confrontation might come at any moment, and that the criminal mind he now pursued was capable of both brilliance and unpredictability. The law had held Evans accountable, yet the deeper, more insidious force remained at large. He walked slowly to the door, pausing to glance back at the study, the evidence, and the meticulously drawn spirals now silent and still. Every clue, he said softly, was there to be read, missed only by those unwilling or unable to see the connections. The villain's escape does not signify failure, it signifies the next stage of the game. And the margins, the faint traces left behind, will guide us to their eventual reckoning. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Unaware of the intellectual duel that had unfolded and the subtle threat that lingered in the shadows, Whimsy stepped into the street, blending seamlessly with the crowd, his mind already tracing routes, patterns, and potential refuges. The puzzle was far from solved, yet the framework for justice had been established. Each overlooked detail, each quiet observation, would eventually coalesce into certainty. As he moved, a faint smile touched his lips, not triumph, not relief, but recognition of the enduring game. The villain had escaped, yet the narrative had been fully revealed. The hidden clues, once ignored or misinterpreted, had been pieced together, exposing the orchestrator's mind and proving, once again, that Whimsy remained one step ahead. And though justice in its final form had not yet been served, the detective knew that the game would continue, and that in the interplay of observation, deduction, and patience, the ultimate reckoning would arrive. The shadows lengthened, the city's sounds shifted, and the detective's mind danced with possibilities. The case, intricate and maddening, had reached its resolution in understanding if not in captivity. The villain had not vanished entirely, they had merely postponed the inevitable. Whimsy walked onward, every step measured, every thought precise, carrying the certainty that, in time, even the most cunning mind must leave traces. And those traces would not escape him. Justice, in one form or another, would follow, sometimes delivered, sometimes eluding, but never beyond the reach of the patient, observant mind. The city's fog had thickened by the time Whimsy reached the quieter streets, the lamplight casting elongated shadows that twisted and danced like living spectres across the cobblestones. He moved with the same deliberate pace that had carried him through every labyrinth of deduction, yet tonight, the weight of unfinished business pressed upon him more keenly than usual. Though Evans was secured and the manipulator had vanished, a subtle unease lingered, lodged in the corner of his mind where intuition whispered truths not yet fully visible. A detail that had seemed trivial at first, a brief, almost casual notation in Evans's final ledger, had resurfaced in his thoughts. It was not the handwriting, nor the pattern of dates, nor even the cryptic sketches Evans had scribbled in the margins. It was a single word, underlined twice, almost obscured, mariner. Alone, it meant nothing, yet placed against the backdrop of the case, it resonated with an eerie familiarity. Whimsy paused, glancing back toward the library where the chaos of evidence had first revealed itself. The word had not been part of the manipulator's grand design. Yet it existed in the margins as if hinting at a parallel thread, one that had remained unpulled, waiting for the proper moment. He stepped into a narrow alley to avoid a pair of late-night pedestrians and allowed himself a moment to consider possibilities. Mariner. A ship? A reference to a location? Or perhaps a code name, a symbol of something submerged beneath the obvious? Whimsy's mind moved through layers of deduction, peeling back each possibility like a well-worn onion, seeking the kernel of truth buried deep within. The manipulator had orchestrated chaos with almost surgical precision, yet no one, no matter how careful, could completely erase all traces of intent. Small slips, the faintest imprints of thought, remained, and this word might be one such slip. The sound of distant bells carried through the fog, punctuating his reflection. He thought of Evans, the pawn who had unwittingly danced to another's tune, and the intricate webs that had bound him. Every moment, every misstep, every obsession had been manipulated, yet every breadcrumb left behind offered the attentive observer a glimpse into the larger picture. Whimsy felt that same thrill of anticipation he had long experienced at the cusp of a revelation. The tantalizing notion that a seemingly closed case could hide another, subtler narrative beneath its surface. Turning a corner, he noticed a flicker of movement near a deserted shopfront. Shadows shifted as though aware of his scrutiny, and a sudden, almost imperceptible sense of being watched sent a shiver down his spine. Not danger. Precisely. Whimsy's instincts were finely attuned, but a recognition that the city, like the human mind, never fully revealed its secrets. Something lay hidden, just beyond reach, requiring patience, observation, and a willingness to notice the unnoticed. He continued, letting the fog envelop him, and allowed his thoughts to drift back to the manipulator's psychology. The mind capable of orchestrating Evans's downfall, yet leaving such subtle hints, suggested more than mere criminal intent. It suggested an ongoing fascination with intellectual pursuit, a desire to challenge, to observe, and perhaps even to taunt. Justice might have been served in part, but the mind behind the orchestration had no reason to stop. Each case, each entanglement, was a puzzle to be constructed and eventually partially revealed. Never fully, never completely. Reaching the corner of Fleet Street, Whimsy paused beneath the gas lamp, the word mariner still echoing in his thoughts. A faint draught carried a scrap of paper across the cobblestones, fluttering at his feet. He bent to retrieve it, a tiny, folded note, almost invisible against the stone. Unfolding it, he found a brief, scrawled message. Some tides never settle. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the tone resonated with the manipulator's previous style. Cryptic, deliberate, evocative. It was not a threat, not a clue pointing to immediate danger, but a subtle reminder that the narrative extended beyond what had been revealed. Whimsy's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in acknowledgement of the enduring challenge. The case, though concluded in the eyes of the law, had threads yet to be followed, layers yet to be unearthed. Some mysteries, he understood, were not meant to be fully resolved, but rather to exist as enduring enigmas, tests of patience and perception for those willing to pursue them. The manipulator had not vanished entirely. They had simply shifted the game, leaving a signal that only an attentive mind could discern. As he resumed his walk, the fog thickened further, obscuring the edges of the familiar streets and lending an almost surreal quality to the surroundings. Each shadow could harbor a clue, each whisper of wind a fragment of truth. Whimsy's senses, honed by years of deduction, registered the subtlest cues: the scuff of a boot, the slight unevenness in a pavement stone, the distant toll of a clock striking midnight. The city itself seemed alive with possibility, an intricate lattice of secrets waiting for those willing to read it. He thought of Evans once more, the pawn who had become a mirror reflecting the manipulator's brilliance. And he thought of the word, mariner, and the cryptic note, hints that something lay beneath, a mystery yet to be unraveled. Perhaps it was a new adversary, a hidden collaborator, or merely a final, lingering taunt from the mind that had orchestrated so much. Whatever the case, the detective recognized that the story was far from over. In the quiet of the early morning, Whimsy's pace slowed as he contemplated the delicate balance between closure and anticipation. Cases resolved too neatly, he reflected, often carried the risk of complacency. the thrill of observation, the intellectual satisfaction of deduction, demanded openness to the unseen and attention to the overlooked. Some mysteries never truly ended, they simply shifted, waiting for the moment when the next thread could be grasped and pulled taut. He paused at the threshold of a bridge spanning the river, watching the fog swirl over the dark water. Reflections shimmered and fractured in the dim light, an ever-changing mosaic that mirrored the elusive nature of truth. The city slept, yet beneath the surface, currents moved in ways unseen, carrying secrets and intentions that defied easy resolution. Whimsy knew that the manipulator, wherever they now lingered, was part of that current, observing and perhaps anticipating his next move. A final glance back at the streets he had traversed revealed no immediate threat, no sign of the figure who had eluded capture, and yet the sense of connection remained, subtle and insistent, like the echo of a voice long silenced but never truly gone. The game would continue, the threads would remain, and the detective's mind would remain engaged, tracing the patterns hidden in plain sight. As the first hints of dawn touched the rooftops, Whimsy turned away from the bridge and resumed his path through the awakening city. Each step carried the weight of knowledge gained, tempered by the awareness of mysteries yet unresolved. Justice had been delivered where it could, truths had been revealed, and the intricate pattern of manipulation had been deciphered. But some questions lingered, small and persistent, refusing closure. The detective's shadow stretched long across the cobblestones, merging with the fog, and in that twilight between night and day, he felt the enduring rhythm of the chase, a puzzle never fully completed, a story never entirely told. Some tides never settle, the note had reminded him, and in that eternal ebb and flow of human cunning and observation, the mysteries of the city and of the human mind would persist, waiting patiently for the next encounter, the next revelation, the next case. And so Whimsy disappeared into the morning mist, a solitary figure poised at the intersection of knowledge and uncertainty, carrying the certainty that the game of deduction never truly ends. Each shadow, each subtle sign, each overlooked clue would call to him again, and he would be ready, patient, and ever watchful. The city slept, but mysteries never rested, and neither would he.